the Growth Over Grades podcast, where we talk about education ideas and topics that matter most to our Spaces EDU educator community. I'm your host, Melody McAllister, educator advocate for Spaces EDU, your solution for digital documentation and assessment of student learning for all. In this episode, I'll be speaking with David Cook, Kentucky Department of Education, Director of Innovative Learning. David has helped bring a life to a new vision from United We Learn that involves community stakeholders and an adoption of a portrait of a learner. He plays an important role with the Kentucky Department of Education, and from their website, it says the Division of Innovation is charged with incubating learning innovations to promote personalized learning for each and every student, with the hope that these new approaches to learning could be scaled in the future. And as an educator, that is a big idea, so I can't wait to dig into that. They are on a mission to bring about vibrant student experiences, accelerating innovation and collaboration with communities. They call this the Big Three. I'm looking forward to digging in and learning more about all of this. David, I'm so glad you're here to talk about the exciting vision you are helping bring about in Kentucky. Can you tell us about yourself, your journey in education, and what led you to work at the Kentucky Department of Education and United We Learn?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks, Melody, for having me on. I really am excited about having a conversation with you about our work. Family business, mom teacher, dad college administrator, both grandmothers English teachers, lots of aunts and uncles. So it was kind of understood that that's what you did. I probably was the one who bucked at it a little bit. I did go through college with the intent. Taught for a year and then said, I don't know if this is what I want to do. So I jumped out into the world for a few years and figured out that finally I did want to come back, but I wasn't sure I wanted to come back into the classroom. So it just so happened that the time I came back, there was a position available at the Department of Education. That was in 1997. I've been there 27 years. I've been all over the department. And that's a good thing, I think, because it's helped me see all the different aspects of the work. But now I'm in charge of, and have been since 2010, the Division of Innovative Learning. We fairly recently changed our name to that from innovation, just simply because we were getting mistaken for technology guys. And we are more about what's going on in the classroom and in schools and school districts and trying to make things better for students and for teachers. So that's why we made that little tweak to the name fairly recently. So I've been there quite a long time. And in about 2021, we really kicked off this effort around United We Learn. So that's been our life since then. So we're excited about things that have sort of been birthed through that process and where we're going to go in the future.
Awesome. Well, I just want to say that, like, several people that I talked to that had the family business of education almost do exactly what you have said. They resist, but then they end up coming back.
Yeah.
And I know we didn't talk about this before we went live, but what is it about education that drew you back? It wasn't the classroom, but what was it?
I think it was just seeing that and learning and really sort of recognizing the investment that we have in our young people. And they are the future, obviously. I mean, that's kind of cliche-ish, but they're the future and they're our investment. It's not something we're doing just because we have to. It's because we know that where this world goes is very much lays on top of what we do in terms of helping our students to be the best that they can be. So that's really what got me back into it. And I think the fact that I came back into it at the state agency level was more about, maybe I can really make some things happen for a lot of folks rather than maybe just one district or one classroom. And I think a lot of people who move into that role like I did feel that way. They want to try to be on not a bigger stage, but more of a more influence, I guess, more
Yeah, and
ability
agent of change.
to touch more kids. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can totally appreciate that. And honestly, that's exactly why I went into education as well. I mean, it's our future. And if
Mm-hmm.
we invest in anything, we need to invest in the people that's going to take over, right? So, yeah. So I definitely appreciate that. You've kind of shared a little bit about your role with United We Learn, but how are you working towards a new vision for education in Kentucky? And tell us a little bit too about um, we've talked about this United We Learn in relationship with the Kentucky Department of Education.
Sure. So in 2021, our then Commissioner Jason Glass um, sort of birthed this idea of a new vision. And I think the most important thing about that decision by him was something we also talked a little bit about, which is he knew that there had been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of transformational initiatives in states all across the country. A lot of them focused on all the things you would expect: higher achievement scores, better outcomes for kids, all those things. But he said there's something that's missing. And he said, I think what it is that communities are not being asked to be directly involved in what that is. So he said, here's how we're going to do this. We're going to create a new vision for Kentucky, but it's not going to be the Department of Education's division or the Kentucky Board of Education's vision. It's going to be the people's vision, which
Wow.
we can talk about that a little bit later, how brilliant that was,
Yeah.
because it took politically off the plate that when you are interacting with legislators and other policymakers and they are like, oh, that's just something the Department of Ed wants. He was able to always say, no, actually, it's not. This is what the people wanted. So he began with, give you quickly a kind of a rundown of the steps along the continuum. He started with listening tours. In the middle of the pandemic, he did 15 virtual listening tours across the state and got thousands of responses from everyday folks, stakeholders across the state, parents, community members, business leaders, policymakers. And he asked them two very basic questions. Tell me about your experience in the public school system.
Mm.
And then tell me what you would want it to look like in the future. So what's our current state? And then what is the future state that we want to have? And all of those responses were brought together. We formed a statewide coalition of stakeholders. And that group on their own, we did not, all we were involved with was the editing of the report once it was completed, crafted a report called the United We Learn report, which is sort of where this all came about. And in the United We Learn report were 10 themes that all of these responses from stakeholders sort of fell into. So 10 buckets. And then when we took those 10 buckets, they sort of fell into 3 bigger buckets, i.e. the themes. So creating more vibrant learning experiences for every student in the state was the first one. Really accelerating innovation, particularly as it related to assessment and accountability, 2 areas that we all at all states struggle with. And then doing all of that in the context of building a future with the community involvement engagement that we wanted to have. So that's where those 3 big ideas came from. And since that report, we have moved to further steps in the process. Probably the biggest one is then finding 18 school districts in the state that we call local laboratories of learning, or L3s. And those 18 districts began the process of developing a local community coalition, just like the one we did to create the report. So they modeled this idea that it can't just be the school district making all this happen. So they went out and they interviewed parents and they interviewed business leaders and all their community people, and they brought together these coalitions that guided their work locally. And that, I think, is the single greatest both difference and impact maker that we've had during this work.
It's absolutely remarkable. I often have said and thought, like, we as a district can't make changes unless the community is willing to also back it up, because it's not just students and parents, and like, it is literally how the community views
Mhm.
schools and how we interact, because people are working. So that
Right.
is absolutely remarkable. And I don't know that I've ever heard of that happening in any other state. Do you guys feel like this is like groundbreaking?
I think it is groundbreaking. I think a couple of other states have sort of been on the journey a little bit, sort of behind us, but they're working
Mhm.
on it. I know in Nevada, they've done some similar kinds of things with community engagement in terms of getting the voice of the community. I think the way all of this work that we're doing connects to the community that's probably the most unique is it really is ultimately about what is it that each local community wants
Yeah.
to their students to come away with beyond the stuff that they already know they're going to come away with, like being able to read and write and do math
Right.
and the content stuff, those academic outcomes that we all know are important. But these folks are really interested in that's not enough for the
Right.
kids in our community, which is where, and this is, I know, another part of our conversation, but that's where the portrait of a learner comes into play
Mhm.
because ultimately every community may, I mean, we have one urban center in Kentucky, the city of
Mhm.
Louisville, 100,000 students in the Jefferson County school system. Then we have all across the state sprinkled around districts like I'm sure you have in where you are, of 300 kids, 500 kids,
Right.
very small school districts.
Yes.
Well, obviously, we can't look at Jefferson County and look at a very small community in the mountains of Eastern Kentucky and say they're the same.
Right.
So we have to have local communities actively engaged in what is it we want. And
Yeah.
that comes out differently, but it sort of always comes out in something that either is a portrait of a learner or looks a lot like it in the sense of building competencies and what we want kids to know beyond that core academic content.
And you kind of just described it, that there's a difference in communities, size, needs, everything that goes involved in that. Why did did Jason Glass, did he ever tell you like what finally motivated him? Like, what was that so important to, like you said earlier, start from the outside in instead of like a school district and then go out?
Because I think he believed he had been a commissioner. I mean, not commissioner. Well, yeah, he had been a commissioner in Iowa quite a few years
Mhm.
ago, but a school superintendent in multiple districts. And I think he always thought that the place where things bogged down was when the district sort of did things to the community, or and said, we're going to do this. Here's what we're going to do. Thanks for listening,
Yeah.
instead of saying, I'm going to listen to you tell me what you want to, what you think is important. Then we're going to take that as the Department of Ed and use our expertise to all the people that we have working at the department and try to figure out some great ways to implement that. And then we're going to work on it, bring it back to you again and say, what do you think? Does this look like it's going to work? And then they'll give us feedback. And then, so it's a loop. It hasn't stopped yet. And I don't know when it will stop, but it's a conversation that continues to be ongoing. We have a sort of a second evolution of this state coalition that is now working. We call it the United We Learn Council, which when you put the K in the front of it for Kentucky, makes it pretty interesting because it's called the Cool Council. So, but that group is the sort of feedback loop. We
Yeah.
begin to develop through our local districts these models. What we're calling them models of local accountability. And that's a whole new aspect of it that I think we're excited about in Kentucky, because we have begun some initial conversations with the U.S. Department of Ed, who
Nice.
seems to be really interested in truly talking about innovative assessment and accountability, not just sort of giving lip service to it. But so we have some real interesting ideas about how we could keep all of that stuff that everybody knows is important and the feds are not going to do away with, those academic outcomes and those tests, those state tests. But how do we incorporate this opportunity for each local community to have its own piece of that
Right.
pie that is about what they think is important for their kids? So um, it's really exciting work. So I hope I answered the question, but
Yeah, you did.
bottom line is Jason, he knew that I think when he got to Kentucky, he knew that that was what he wanted to really say. I think this is it. I think this might be the difference maker.
Right.
If we reassess and redesign the system to come from the outside in, I think we're going to find better results.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head when you said that he had said it's get away from what the district does to the community, as in like this is what everything is like when we model it from the inside, like from top down. That's what's going to just infuse into our classrooms, into our schools, into our districts. It's that modeling. And I am with students every day, and I know that modeling is so important. And so you can't say or have this initiative or this huge change without backing it up like you all have. And that's what impresses me. So
Right.
kudos
Yeah.
to you guys for involving the community, because that's where it begins.
And I think the other stakeholder group that we always sort of tend to leave out, which has always been baffling to me, because you're a teacher and you know this, especially with students who are in a place where they do have thoughts about such
Yes.
things, is we've never really involved students in a deep way in what is it that you think you're missing in your. And so going way back to that initial United We Learn report, there was a lot of data in there from students. And one of the things we did in there that was kind of cool is, as a part of that report, the coalition, the group, created sort of um, kind of would-be characters or people. Some of them were students, some of them were teachers, some of them were community members, based on all the responses. So these are people that maybe are not getting their voice heard in
Right.
schools, and so that was kind of another little cool thing that happened out of all that, was sort of building those profiles, we called them, of students and teachers and community members. So we
Yeah.
know now there are some commonalities across these communities, but there are also, like I said, depending on where you are and what you're, we have, for the most part, we're a fairly homogeneous state. We don't have a lot of diversity, but in the places that we do, it's pretty deep.
Mm.
So I live in a county just outside of Louisville, which has the largest population of Latino students in the state by
Mhm.
percentage. So we're not
Mhm.
obviously number wise, but 14 or 15% of our students, because we're an agricultural community and there's a lot of agricultural work that comes, and families come to my area. So, but that makes my community, although it is the same size school district as about 20 others in Kentucky, um, it's different than even those other 20, that even others that sit outside a city. It's
Yeah.
still its own unique place. And that's why I always have this thing behind my head here that you've been probably reading. It's the thing I keep. This work has sort of gotten me to that phrase, which is, communities are as unique as the learners they serve.
Amen.
um, so we have to figure that out. I think that's another piece that's beyond probably Kentucky, but this idea that we continue to have to think that our cities and our towns and our rural areas are all the same, and
Right.
they can be judged that way.
Right.
So
Well, I want to say before we move on, because we're going to talk
yeah.
about the portrait of a learner, but the fact that you guys included student voice, because I feel like that often is just lip service. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
really does that. But if you're trying to get student achievement to grow, you can't forget that. That is a
Yeah.
key part of the community. So I'm so glad you guys did that. I know in my classroom, and I don't always want to hear what they say, but I know I have to do this because I want my lessons to be better. But I do ask my students, how could I have done this better? How could I have
Right.
taught this better? What would you have changed? And sometimes I'm like dying inside because I know they're going to hit me with the truth. But honestly, that's where you start, because it's who's affected even more than anybody else. So kudos to you guys for that.
And just one real quick thing about that is an example of the way this work was begun. When we did those listening tours that I talked about,
Hmm.
Commissioner didn't lead those conversations. Guess who did?
The students?
Students.
Nice.
Students led every one of those conversations.
I
So
love that.
they were given a little training. They had a script to go by, but they were the ones asking those community members, "What do you think? What is your thought? What is you know?" And somebody was recording all of it, and they were able to ask additional questions. So it was a powerful. It was a statement early on that student voice was so important to this process. So
Yeah, and also goes back into your deeper your 3.
yeah,
So those students will never forget that, and it
right,
will, and also in your whole life where you wanted to make change, those students
yeah.
are always going to remember that. Awesome. So let's talk about, where did the idea of a portrait of a learner begin? And if you don't mind talking about it just a little, in case one of somebody is listening and they're like, "What is a portrait of a learner?" I know it's a new idea for some people.
Yeah.
What research did United We Learn use to help align with their vision?
Right. So we went. I'll go back to 2017. Our a previous commissioner asked me to head up an initiative to create. He didn't call it a portrait at that time. We were really talking about. We wanted to design a set of competencies that districts could use to help beyond academic content. Um, so it was kind of pre-portrait conversation, but at the end of the day, it was similar. And we did two things. We had a few districts in the state, 11 to be exact, that already had a portrait in place.
Hmm.
So we brought those folks together and we said, let's look at your portraits. Surprise, surprise, Melody. 95% of the portraits in those 11 districts were exactly the same. The
Nice.
competencies that
Mhm.
people want, almost always with some tweaks to language, but they're all those things that we always hear about. They're being a collaborator, being creative, being a problem solver, being a critical thinker, being deeply involved in their academics, being involved as a citizen of their community. So all those things, and they came up over and over again. So we were able to sort of mesh all that together into a set of what we called at the time anchor competencies.
Mm.
Then the pandemic hit, so all that work got put away. Then United We Learn comes along, and everybody's going, wow, I'm hearing about this portrait of a learner. So, to your question, a portrait of a learner to me is, what does it mean to have a prepared graduate? Not a college ready graduate or a career ready graduate, but a prepared graduate. And across the board, and then the other aspect of our research that we did was we looked at other states that had done similar work. Places like South Carolina and Virginia that actually adopted statewide portraits.
Mhm.
So, but all of it was conversation about these competencies that continued on and on to be the same competencies anytime we looked. We very rarely, we may have seen more competencies in somebody's portrait, but we always found these core ones always there.
Right.
So our State Board of Education back in the fall adopted these competencies as a model set of competencies to allow for districts to have. If they already had a statewide or already had a portrait, then they didn't need to worry about it. But if they were needing some help on
Right.
where to go to get one, these are the competencies that we feel are important for us to be looking at in any situation, regardless of where it was. So that happened first. The state adopted those model competencies. And then we began building a resource bank of for helping people in districts get there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really exciting from a timing perspective for our conversation today. We have 171 school districts in the state of Kentucky. We just hit our 100th district that has either implemented or has passed, developed, processed a portrait of a learner. And
Wow.
I would say 70% of that 100 happened since the State Board of Education adopted those competencies. So there were a lot of districts that I think really were paying attention to the portrait of a learner, but
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what to do with it. And now that we're providing the kind of support, resource, and guidance, and there is sort of a, hey, look, the state believes that these are the important things. And so now you can go out and see these. And like I said, they may have tweaked or changed a little bit. Of You'll see a lot of them will refer to an innovative thinker, or so they change words, but the bottom line is the descriptions of those competencies tend to remain really close. So that's exciting because it means that we probably hit on the right combination. And now we're really trying to get to the next piece. That's what happens next, I think, with United We Learn, is what does this conversation that I mentioned previously about with the feds and with others in policy, how does local accountability fit
Right.
into a larger model? And we think that it's somehow the portrait. So how do we measure the portrait? How do we report on the portrait in a way that's meaningful, valid, reliable, all those things that people need when they talk about accountability, but still allows for there to be flexibility. So it's not, okay, here it is, and everybody's going to do it exactly the same way. No, so we have inside our L3 community, the local
Mm-hmm.
labs, we have already got 3 districts who have already built their local accountability model and are actually measuring it now.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they have said their competencies are reported on. They have a couple of them have a dashboard that you can go to if you're a local community member and see how different aspects of these competencies are being played out in the student body. So yeah, it's progressing the way I think it should progress, and we're trying to provide more and more districts. I don't know that we will formally continue to build the L3, like more cohorts of L3s or whatever, but we want the design process
Right.
of building that local coalition to continue and to expand. So we're providing resource to districts who want to start a local coalition. They don't necessarily need to be labeled as a local laboratory of learning, but they want that thing to happen in a community-based structure. And I think in one last thing that I will say that I think was a vital key element to creating those local coalitions, and there's a lot that I could talk about, but we didn't make very many requirements on those local district communities about, okay, you have to have, we didn't hand them a sheet of paper that said you will have 4 teachers and 3 students, and we said it's up to you. The only thing we required of those 18 districts was you will have co-leads to this coalition, one person from the community and one person from the district, and they will have equal authority over that coalition. So it was so important for us to recognize that we don't want this to be, okay, here's this great idea about a community involvement,
Mm-hmm.
community engagement. But at the end of the day, the district was still doing this thing where they were sort of telling folks, we wanted this to be, and I'll be honest, and you can imagine, it was tough in some places.
Right.
It was a struggle because it had never happened before.
Right.
And the district people obviously were the ones that I think struggled with it more, because they're like, we're giving up some control here.
Right.
And yeah, you are. And
Yeah.
that's a good thing. And it doesn't mean at the end of the day, you're still not going to, it's all got to go back through you and flow through you. But if you don't have this, you're just going to probably end up in the same loop that you're in and have always been in, with as it relates to improvement and transformation.
Yeah. I mean, it really is such an important partnership that mostly has been lost. And so kind of going through our entire conversation,
Yep.
like we know that we have to have, the state tests are the state tests, but I would love in a perfect world, and you and I are in this for the same reason, though we're in different roles, but that this is what would be driving our learning and our achievement more so than state mandated tests that really
Yep.
don't show much. They don't show that portrait. They don't
No.
show a student and the gifts and the unique talents that they have that is also contributing to society, which ultimately we want. We want people
Right.
actively changing society for the better, and this is going into that direction. And so when you're talking in my mind, I'm thinking, this is wonderful, wonderful. This is exactly the direction that we all should be following. And I still think, how are students being impacted? How are they owning this? Are they feeling like they're part of it? You're doing a great job of including them. And so I wonder, have you heard any response from students about the portrait of a learner yet, or is it still pretty new?
It's fairly new, but we have already got, as I mentioned, we have a few of those L3 communities who are far enough down the path
Mm,
that they are actually measuring, they're actually doing defenses of learning or whatever you want, several different ways of going about that. But we have students all across the state who are taking part, usually at, say, fifth grade, eighth grade, 12th grade, in some kind of a process that's performance based,
hmm.
that they have to tell a group of individuals, usually community members and teachers, this is what I've learned up
Yeah.
until this point. And most of what that comes out as is those additional competencies.
Right.
I've learned how to be a better teammate. I've learned how to be a better communicator. I've learned how to be a better thinker when it comes to solving problems. Because that's the bottom line, Melody.
Yeah.
I Several years ago, we did a really great thing. We brought together about 25 heads of corporation, Kentucky-based big manufacturers and other people like that. And we said, what's the thing that gets people fired?
Mm,
And they, to a person, said, they don't know what to do when a conflict arises. They
mm,
don't know what to do when there's a problem on that line, or when there is, and they just sort of stop. They
right.
can't, they know how to do their job, and they know how to run the machine that they're running or whatever it is that they're doing, until something happens to that. And
Right.
then nobody has taught them what to do when that happens. So,
Right.
we can train kids to do jobs, but we have to also train them so we can give them content, but we also have to give them skills. And
Right.
that's what the portrait does. It gives them learning skills that, and I would put at the top of that, even though we don't really do it as a competency in most of our portraits, adaptability. Because
Right.
what all that does is it says, Melody, tomorrow they're going to change what your job is.
Mm,
And guess what? I don't think you're going to have a problem with that, because you've been taught the skills necessary to adapt to what something new from a content base of your job. So um, that's why this is so important, that we have to create that place. So really quickly, the way I would describe what we're sort of going for or envisioning, if you want to think about this in the world of accountability, is, what would it look like if we still had those state tests, but we shrunk as a total of the overall accountability number, we
right.
shrunk what those tests counted for,
Right.
and we added to the number inside that number something local.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole lot of ways that we could have districts submit their plan, and we could go through some kind of process to validate that it's a good set of local competencies. But then at the end of the day, when that school report card comes out in the fall, hey, look, this district is doing this on math tests and this on reading tests, but also this district has this set of local competencies, and here's what they're doing to measure them, and here's where they are in their goals toward, meeting those demands of those students. So that's what I think is a vision. And I don't know anything about what's the percentage of the two, but I think sometimes people get bogged down in when we say we're going to change accountability. Well, you mean you're going to do a new test?
Right.
No, that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about thinking differently about what we have to measure for kids
Right.
beyond their ability to, as I said, to read and to write and to do math. So that's
Agreed.
where.
Well, I was going to say, and that's actually where equity comes in.
Mm-hmm.
That's where our students are actually being served.
Yeah.
That's where our students are actually in their community with the competencies that make sense for their community and their schools and their
Right.
life. That's where they find belonging. That's where, I mean, it's almost like we've taken this big idea and we're funneling it down to the people that it actually really matters to and what
Mm-hmm.
will help them grow, because we know, you and I both know, those tests, the state tests, they don't show that, they don't
Right.
allow for that. And so I'm excited about this. I think this is a great conversation that should be having, everybody should be having, and going to. So yeah, leading the way is amazing. I want to ask you. I know I also want to respect your time, but does United We Learn collaborate with school districts that choose to develop local competencies from a consulting point of view?
Yes. So right now, I would say that those 18 districts, each of those districts has a coach.
Mm-hmm.
So as those districts build out their portraits, there's support there. We have some intermediary partners within the state. The University of Kentucky has a center for next generation learning. Those
Nice.
folks are helping us. They're traveling across the state, helping districts with their portraits and with their competencies. And then we have a pretty robust set of resources that includes a guidebook. So if you don't feel like you have the either financial resources or whatever to bring a coach in, here's the steps. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
really nice, robust set of resources that are online, so that they can go, okay, it's a continuum included in that, so you can check where you are on the process, all of that sort of thing. So I feel like we've done a really pretty good job of creating a place where people can go to get into the work or the portrait. And additionally to that, or sort of alongside of that, is that idea of, before you really do a portrait, you really need to ask yourselves the twofold question of who's with you in developing this portrait,
Right.
and why are you doing it?
Yeah.
And here's the thing, Melody, if the only reason you're doing it is to help improve your test scores, that's probably not a really good reason. But
Right.
if you are really seeking to improve the lives of every young person in your district by building for them a preparedness with skills and dispositions or mindsets and content knowledge, then this is why you should do this. So don't
Right.
just jump into it because the district next door
Right.
did. Ask yourself, get the right people around the table, and then ask them why they want something different. So,
Right. I agree. And I will say that the information that you put out is really, I was reading it, and
mhm,
I don't have any fancy degrees, but I was able to just like, oh my gosh, this is really good. So yes, you guys are putting out great information.
I'm glad to
Also,
hear
I
that.
just, Spaces EDU produces this. We are a great place to start with Portrait of a Learner. If you don't know where to start building that
Yeah,
up, I want to throw that out there. But also, before we say goodbye,
yeah.
David, and it's been such a pleasure talking with you.
Mhm.
And you seem like a very remarkable person that sees education from a different vantage point. I usually talk with people that have been in the classroom, have gone through, a different type of journey. So I really admire your journey and the ability to see where you saw at the beginning, like, where can I make the most change? I care about this and I know what my skill set is. I can appreciate that so much. So what's next for you? What's next for United We Learn? And don't forget, where can we follow you?
Right. So I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. United We Learn, as I've mentioned, sprinkled throughout this, is just continuing the process. I think our focus right now is around helping districts to develop the actual models for these portraits. So what does it look like to measure them? What does it look like to report on them so that they make sense to the community? So I think that's where we're going. You know, I was really kind of like you were shocked a little bit when we got to 100 so fast of our
Yeah.
districts. I was like, it'll take us forever to get to 100. And as you know, every state is probably very much alike. We it I may not be around when when we get if we get to 171, but because there's just some districts that just aren't going to do it because they're
Mhm.
just not going to do it.
Right.
But I think we're going to get to a really robust number of districts, and that's going to sort of lead the charge so that more and more districts will just sort of go, well, they're doing it and it must be working. And so, sort of that that push towards that tipping point that causes
Right.
us to go over. And so, yeah, so that's where the United We Learn work is going. I'll let you in a little secret. It's not a secret. I mean, people around
I
here
love
know.
secrets.
It's people around here, but I don't mind saying it on. I'm sort of, as you might imagine, when I mentioned to you 27 years, I'm sort of
Mm.
towards the end. I got about 6 months left.
Oh, wow.
Of state government work, which doesn't mean in any way that I'm walking away from this world. In fact, all of this has sort of given me um, excitement to help others. It's a little
Right.
bit like what I mentioned at the beginning and why I got into this work. And now I know there's a bunch of other states and a bunch of other school districts that would really like to be involved in this work. So I hope that once I finish my time at the Kentucky Department of Education, and I will say right now, I am so excited because I have a team that I've never had before. They are high quality people. They drive most of the work anyway, and I just sort of um, what can I do to help you sort of thing. I used to be kind of a one-man operation for the first few years, but now we're really cohesive and cooking, and I'm really excited about where the work's going to continue to go. So I'm not worried about anything in Kentucky
Mhm.
doing anything but escalating. So, but it's an exciting time in Kentucky, Melody. It really is.
Yeah.
I just keep watching because I think we're gonna hire a new commissioner here in the next couple of months. It could be from anywhere. I have a feeling it's going to be someone inside the state,
Mhm.
i.e., maybe a sitting superintendent or someone like that who's been involved in our work. So that makes it even more exciting.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I love that. That really is exciting. Well, congratulations to you.
thank you.
And yeah, just when you come to Alaska, let me know. We will sit, we will have some tea.
Absolutely, absolutely.
No,
Uh,
I really do appreciate that you
sure.
shared all this today. I am always inspired. We have amazing guests that come on here, and it's not just like celebrity people that are well known, but people that are inside doing the real work, the
Yeah.
hard stuff that is really making change. And I think that you are doing that. And I know you work, you said, with a great group of people, but you are part of that as well. So congratulations for all the hard work that you guys have done. That is actually making a difference in the lives of students every
Uh,
day.
Thank you so much, and we'll just keep doing it. We're as you said, we're here for kids. Um, that means if you're here for kids, you're here for teachers, in my
Yeah,
opinion. So, um,
agreed.
so you can't say student-centered education without thinking about teachers. But at the end of the day, I think that's what we're trying to do in Kentucky is build a better place for learning to occur. If you want to boil it down to something, it's we want learning to be happening more and deeper than it has been in the past.
I love that so much. I think that's wonderful. Well, thank you all for listening. Thank you, David, for coming on today. Um, you know, spread the word, join our community, facebook.com/groups/spaces edu. Learn more about the portrait of a learner that we support. And y'all just thank you for doing the good work, and we'll see you next time. Bye.